on much of any issue is quite complicated. Frankly, I don't think the reality of Brexit has really caught up with people. I think people have seen it in line with some of these broader populist movements that we had in Washington with the election of Trump. Some of the rise of populist parties in Europe. People are certainly aware that it's happening, but I don't think people are following the intricacies of the debate, and I don't think people are really aware of what the long-term consequences have been. The U.S., I would argue, has also been largely absent from these debates. President Obama went to London 2 months before the referendum, made a pitch for a strong UK and a strong EU, so clearly very supportive of the European Union. In contrast, Donald Trump is quite skeptical of the EU. He's referred to it as an economic foe. He sees that the United States is not as strong against the European Union collectively as it is against individual member states. He's called Brexit a great thing, and I think is generally supportive of countries, including the U.S., gaining their sovereignty from multinational organizations that he feels may not be in their interest. And so the U.S. really has not been involved in these conversations. I think his main focus on Brexit has been on achieving an advantageous free trade agreement between the U.S. and the U.K. And this has certainly played into a lot of Theresa May's desire to have a global Britain and to be able to persuade her public that the country is going to be fine outside the EU. The problem, of course, is that the U.S. is going to try and force the U.K. to sign up to a lot of agreements that the EU is not a party to. And I think the U.S. is going to be much more strict on agricultural demands. And right now, the U.K. is wanting to retain the EU's regulations on genetically modified food. The Brits don't want our wonderful chlorine-washed chicken. And I think these issues are going to end up complicating efforts to reach a free trade agreement. Final point on that is, and one that I have been personally disappointed by, is that the U.S. has not been very engaged in this question of Northern Ireland. The U.S. has, of course, invested very heavily over decades in trying to promote a peace process in Northern Ireland. Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell was, of course, instrumental in reaching the Good Friday Agreement. And if nothing else, this seems to be a place where the U.S. could have been a good actor in trying to help facilitate either some sort of agreement or to help reconstitute the Northern Ireland Assembly. But the U.S. has been largely absent in that discussion as well.
Now, there's this old saying that Britain and the USA are two countries separated by a common language. How will their future relationship, that special relationship between those two countries, will look like after Brexit?
Certainly the U.S. and the UK are going to remain close partners. We're both members of the UN Security Council. The UK will continue to be an active member in NATO, but it is going to change the way that the U.S. engages with the EU. The UK certainly has always been America's closest partner in the EU, and frankly was sometimes a useful backdoor for the United States to be able to insert its opinions into EU policy discussions on things like sanctions, on trade issues, other areas where the UK was most like-minded. So the US is now going to have to adjust to an extent the way it engages there. Certainly Trump, with his skepticism of the EU, is engaging much more bilaterally with countries rather than with the EU as a collective. But the challenge is going to be that the amount of bandwidth that Brexit is sucking up in London, both in terms of dealing with the initial withdrawal agreement and Brexit agreement, as well as we were talking about going forward, having to reconstitute all of these domestic policy processes. My concern is going to make London very inward looking for the next couple of years and less likely to be able to play the kind of outward looking, internationally engaged role that would ultimately be in America's interest.
And many questions are still unanswered. Some of them, though, you answer them in your excellent paper, Divided Kingdom, which can be downloaded for free on the website brookings.edu. And your Twitter account is @A_Sloat. Thank you very much, Amanda Sloat in Washington, D.C.
What we are asking is for a very large amount of our own money back.
I believe that Britain will be safer, stronger, and better off in a reformed European Union.
The People's Vote March 2 weeks ago saw hundreds of thousands marching, hoping that Brexit can be reversed. But can it? Is it legally possible to reverse the process? Let's ask that Elini Moraïtou. She's a lawyer at CMS Lefebvre in Paris, and she is specialized in European and constitutional law. So the perfect guest to talk about some legal aspects of Brexit. Welcome, Elini. Let's start with Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty, the famous article that was triggered by the British government on March 29, 2017. And that was actually the start of the countdown to B-Day. Is that a process that can be interrupted? Could the UK send a text message to Jean-Claude Juncker on March 29 around 10 o'clock at night and saying, well, we're not withdrawing. Let's forget about Article 50. We won't leave.
As Michel Barnier, the EU negotiator, says, I think that we are entering uncharted waters. And I explain to you why. Article 50 provides that a member state has a possibility to decide to withdraw to leave the European Union. When such a decision is made, the member state which has decided to leave shall notify the European Council of its decision to leave, and there is a negotiation period during which the member state negotiates with the European institution, especially the European Commission, on the terms of this withdrawal. And it is provided by Article 50 that the European Union law ceases to apply from the date of entry into force of the withdrawal agreement, or failing that, 2 years after the notification of the withdrawal decision done by the member states. So the European Commission has published a document in which it refers to the possibility of revoking Article 50. And according to the European Commission, Article 50 cannot be unilaterally reversed. So for the Commission, notification is a point of no return.
Okay, so the point of no return has been reached.
It is true that Article 50 does not provide for the possibility of withdrawing the decision to leave the European Union.
So basically the EU law is clear. The Brits have made up their mind by invoking Article 50 in 2017. And that's it.
Exactly, because we cannot decide that, okay, we decided to trigger Article 50, but now unilaterally we changed our mind. So I believe that if the UK decided to revoke its decision, it would not be possible unilaterally, just because the UK decided to do so, to stop the procedure which has been engaged since 2016. And accept that it stays within the European Union. I think that we have to say that there is no precedent, because Article 50 has never been triggered before. But I would rather say that we would have to apply a procedure laid down by the treaties. And this procedure, I think, but okay, as I already said, we are entering uncharted waters. But I think that it would be mostly a procedure which is like the procedure laid down in Article 49. So entering the European Union, even if it would not be the same procedure that we apply the same principles that we apply for Turkey, for instance. But it would need a vote within the European Council. I think that we could not avoid to have a vote on within the European Parliament, and then ask every national parliament to decide on this matter.
So from a legal point of view, March 29 at 11 p.m. UK time, that's it. Brexit is Brexit.
Yes, exactly. If there is no withdrawal agreement, ratified, not simply concluded, but ratified before the 13th March 2019, EU law will cease to apply with no transition period. From that date, the UK becomes a third party. But if there is a withdrawal agreement, then there will be an additional transition period of 21 months.
Well, there are only 21 weeks left for such a withdrawal agreement. That will take a lot of hard work. Now, imagine there will be a final deal and then a referendum, a people's vote, where the British voters maybe reject the bill. I realize that's a lot of ifs, but what would happen then in that unlikely case?
So, and all that before the withdrawal date?
Yes, although that's very unlikely, but yeah, imagine.
Well, I do not want to be cruel, but...
You can be cruel on this podcast, no problem.
Yes, I can, but I do not want to. So I have to say that there is a general principle which says that every member state has its own constitutional rules and applies its constitutional rules. And I'm not sure, but it's not up to me to decide, neither to pronounce on this matter. If UK constitutional law allows to have to organize a second referendum, but in any case, national constitutional rules do not exempt member states from their obligation to respect EU law. I cannot imagine how the UK could, on the basis of its own constitutional rules and the second referendum, provided that it is possible, not comply with the provisions of the treaty, which are rather clear on the date from which the UK ceases to be member of the European Union. But once again, we do not know what will happen. But I think that a referendum could perhaps allow the UK to simply say that we changed our mind. Finally, we do not want to leave. But I'm quite sure that from a legal point of view, the UK cannot decide unilaterally, just because a referendum was held or will be held, to stay in the European Union.
You're also Greek, Elini Moraïtou. Do you know by any chance how Greece is preparing for a hard Brexit?
I think that in Greece there is the same preoccupation concerning to the rights of UK citizens living in Greece, and also the rights of Greeks, because there are many Greeks who live in London and in other UK cities. But when it comes to, I would say, the movement of goods, services, I think that Greece is obviously concerned, but the impact will be less important than in France, because in France the exchange of goods, services is very important with the UK, and I think that Greece is not concerned at the same level.
In the case of France, there's a direct border between the UK and France, which is not the case between Greece and the UK.
Exactly.
Well, thank you very much, Elini Moraïtou, for giving us some legal insight in the complicated Brexit process. And you're a lawyer at CMS Lefebvre in Paris. Afgharisto, Elini.
Parakallah. Thank you very much.
So we need time. We need much time, much more time.
Don't panic! Don't panic! Right. Don't panic. You're all right.
In this podcast, I regularly invite refugees, Brits who decided to leave the UK and to go and live on the European continent, or maybe even somewhere else. This week, my refugee is Alex Rawlings. He's 27-year-old, he's a language teacher and an app developer, and he speaks 15 languages almost fluently. Incredible, but true. Hello, bonjour, hola, Alex. Yeah, you were named the UK's most multilingual student in 2012. That sounds very admirable, but, well, I always thought that the Brits don't speak any foreign languages. So was it easy to become the most multilingual student in the UK?
Yeah, I don't think there was a lot of competition, to be honest. I think most multilingual student of like India would be a much better title to have, seeing as like multilingualism is by far the norm there. But actually, I mean, so one of the ironies of the UK, and one of the things that I loved about growing up in this country was, although people don't speak a lot of languages, there's an awful lot of languages there. And definitely as a child and as a teenager, every time I would step on the tube, every time I'd step into a public space, I would hear languages around me. And I just felt so kind of intrigued by those languages. I loved the sound of them. I loved the way people were expressing themselves. I loved watching their body language as they were speaking their own language. But I also felt very frustrated that I couldn't understand them. And I didn't have the reaction that kind of the Nigel Farages of our world have of, oh, you should be speaking my language. But I more kind of thought, well, I should be speaking their language and I should be able to understand what they're saying and speaking, because they're expressing themselves so freely and with so much passion that, you know, why would I want to force them to speak my language? So that was a real motivational factor actually for me in wanting to learn languages from a very young age.
So how many languages do you speak?
So I've learned about 15 languages in total.
15, wow. Yeah, including Nederlands, geloof ik, my native language.
Ja, ik spreek ook een beetje Nederlands. Dutch is actually weirdly where it all kind of started. When I was about 14, I went with my parents to Amsterdam for the day, for my mum's birthday. And we were just sitting on the plane, and I just remember the security announcement coming on in Dutch. And I thought, what on earth is that sound? I've never heard anything so strange in my life. It sort of sounds like English.